Hey, can you guys hear me? Can you hear? Okay, can you hear now? This one? Okay, can you hear? No? Yeah, a little bit.
Tech guy left and he locked the door. This is not the mic. This is for broadcast. This is for the hall. Okay. 1, 2. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just speak up.
Is the volume? Well, the thing is that. So this is actually.
Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Sharon Choi. I'm the Speakers Coordinator with Cultural Events Board. I just have to read this thing about Cultural Events Board real quick. The Cultural Events Board, sorry, bear with me, it'll be quick, is dedicated to promoting cultural awareness on the CU Boulder campus through a wide variety of programming. The board is a student-run organization composed of 9 student voting members, 2 non-student voting members, and a varying number of ex officio members. The board's annual budget currently exceeds $200,000 and is derived from mandatory student fees. The budget is allocated for board projects, student group projects, and the board's operating expenses. Each year, CEB selects 7 topics of interest that will broaden the perspective of the university community. The board then decides on speakers and events that will address these areas of interest to campus. In addition to the board's own projects, CEB also sponsors over 50 student group events each year. So for anyone who's interested in applying to CEB, just stop by our office. It's 326, or you can call. The number is 492-3227. Tonight our speaker will be Dr. Eqbal Ahmad, and Mansour Jarbo will introduce him. So.
Good evening. My name is Mansour. I want to just give a context to why this event is happening. After the U.S. bombed Sudan and Afghanistan several weeks ago, we picked up the New York Times to try to understand the motivation behind the U.S. government bombing those places. Turning it into a wag the dog scenario seemed too much of a conspiracy theory. That had to be a reason. But as I read the report, the coverage frighteningly resembled the government-owned press I grew up with in my native country. The reporter interviewed an official from the Department of Defense, another from the State Department, and a former intelligence officer who could have been the neutral on this report. I felt I was reading the Pentagon Times. As much as I mourn the death of innocent civilians, I mourn the death of journalism. It was an all too familiar case of free press in what is considered the freest country in the world. And now there's a film coming out in a few weeks called The Siege. It's a film starring Bruce Willis and Denzel Washington. The plot revolves around a group of Arab Muslims plotting to bomb New York City, which prompts police authorities to impose a martial law and to round up Arab Americans and Muslims. So, as a product of concerned students coming together, the simple and radical idea of presenting an authentic voice seemed critical. Someone who is not an expert because he or she took a class, an intensive course on Islam and terrorism with the State Department. Rather, someone who has dedicated their lives in the struggle for democracy and justice. It was a perfect opportunity when David Barsamian told me that he had just returned from conducting a set of interviews with Professor Ahmad at Amherst, and that he would be available for a lecture. Many of you are perhaps familiar with Professor Ahmad. When I was in Beirut, Lebanon earlier in the summer, I was pleased and surprised to see a portrait of his hung in a cafe in a working class neighborhood, along with the pictures of Noam Chomsky and Che Guevara. Probably more Lebanese knew Noam Chomsky than people in America. Ahmed began his political work in Algeria when he worked with Frantz Fanon during the revolt against the French. He has been long active on the issue of Palestinian sovereignty. This brought him to a close relationship with Palestinian scholar Edward Said, who dedicated his book Culture and Imperialism to him. For the last 30 years, he has been teaching at several American universities. and has been writing in various publications like The Nation, The New York Times, Harper's, and the Monthly Review. After 15 years in teaching at Hampshire College, he is now dedicating his time to establishing a new alternative university, Khaldunia, in Pakistan. Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General, has just delivered a speech in honor of Professor Ahmad, calling him, quote, a public intellectual who crossed many boundaries to engage in the struggles for liberation and human rights, a fearless thinker whose analysis of world events has helped me understand some of the issues with which the UN must grapple every day. When David asked him about the choices he had made in his life, his reply was as follows: I had two choices. I could have lived a very comfortable, boring, selfish, quiet existence as a regular academic or a corporate executive. Instead, I chose to live a life that has been very rich spiritually and intellectually and rather poor materially. I have the simple satisfaction of knowing that we have tried, did the best we could, did not always succeed, but tried to change where change seemed necessary. I'm very honored to introduce Professor Ahmad.
Thank you very much for those very generous introduction. But I want to tell the audience not to be fooled by such introductions. Just before I came up here, they gave me a watch and asked me to speak for not more than 55 minutes. David Barsamian also instructed me to tell the audience to boo at me if I cross the 55-minute limit. I would suggest that you do the booing after 60 minutes. It reminds me to, first of all, tell you a story. I'm a storyteller. 1961, I went to Cuba under an assumed name with an Algerian delegation. Because in Algeria I couldn't be a Pakistani, as in America I couldn't be an Algerian, and in Pakistan I can't be an American. So you know the complications of life. We met with Castro. He received us for breakfast. That was the 26th of July. And he treated us most graciously. And around 12:30, and he said, comrades, you are coming with me to the 26th July celebrations. Comrade, it won't be very long. I am a man of few words, said Fidel Castro. We went with him, we followed him. He spoke for 6.5 hours. I am a man of few words too. I hope you have brought your sleeping bags. No, but seriously speaking, they have asked me to speak on terrorism. And they gave it a very good title, which is not mine. What's the title? It's theirs and ours, or something like that? Yeah. But actually, the title that I was given is uncannily close to what I want to talk about, which is two views of terrorism, theirs and mine, because a third doesn't exist. Terrorists are typically shy of giving reasons for their terrorism beyond a cause. If they are very intelligent and belong to a minority group, they explain that they have a cause. The rest do not describe a cause. Therefore, the analysis of terrorism comes from two sources. Those who claim to oppose it, and those who try to explain it. Those are the two sources. These are ideologically loaded words: terrorists and terrorism. First, a small bit of history. In the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, if you look at historical literature in English and Spanish, you will find references to Indian terrorists. The Indians they are referring to are not the ones from where I come. They are the ones from where Chandu comes. Where is Chandu? Shoot your arrow, show yourself. Then they are referring, in other words, to the indigenous peoples of the southern hemisphere who were resisting their dispossession and what would turn out to be their ultimate destruction. In the late 18th and early, rather throughout the 19th centuries, you get this word in English literature and in English journalism. By English I mean belonging to England, with reference to the thugs, Thugs, a word that has entered into the English language as a synonym of terrorist, thugs. And thuggy, which was in the 19th century a synonym of terrorism. If you look at Oxford English Dictionary, you will find the synonyms even today. Thugs, thuggy, terrorist, terrorism. Thugs, historians of South Asia among you will recall, was a religious grouping, movement of low-caste Hindus and Muslims who dedicated themselves to committing crimes against the establishment of British rule on India. And they really have become terrorists for all time. It's only in recent years that this subaltern group of subaltern studies that came out of Delhi school and now has spread all over the place. Its founder is now teaching in Australia. A subaltern group has now been depicting the Thuggy movement as essentially an anti-colonial movement that was typed as a criminal conspiracy. Then more interesting things happen. In the 1930s and 1940s, the Jewish underground in Palestine was described as quote unquote terrorist. Then new things happen. By 1942, Holocaust was occurring and a certain liberal sympathy with the Jewish people had built up in the Western world. At that point, the terrorists of Palestine, who were Zionists, the terrorists of Palestine suddenly started to be described by 1944-45 as freedom fighters. At least two Israeli prime ministers, including Menachem Begin, had actually, you can find in the books, posters with their pictures saying terrorist and prize this much. The highest prize I have noted so far was 100,000 British pounds on the head of Menachem Begin, the terrorist. Then in 1969 and from 1969 to 1990, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, occupied the center stage as the terrorist organization. Yasser Arafat has been described repeatedly by the great sage of American journalism, I'm referring to William Safire of the New York Times, as the chief of terrorism. That's Yasser Arafat. Now, on September 29, 1998, I was rather amused, not quite happy, to notice a picture of Yasser Arafat to the right of President Bill Clinton, and to his left is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is known as Mr. Yahoo all over the Middle East. And Clinton is looking towards Arafat, and Arafat is looking literally like a meek mouse. And just a few years earlier, he used to appear with this very menacing look around him, with a gun appearing menacing from his belt. You remember those pictures, and you remember the next one. I should go on. In 1985, end of 85, beginning of 86, I can't remember the dates, President Ronald Reagan used to be the President of the United States. Once Oliver, then Waters. President Ronald Reagan received a group of bearded men. These bearded men I was writing about in those days. At the moment I was preparing to write about them in the New Yorker. Actually did. They were very ferocious looking bearded men with turbans and tall and kind of looking like they came from another century. And President Reagan received them in the White House. After receiving them, he spoke to the press. And he pointed towards them, I'm sure some of you will recall that moment, and said, these are the moral equivalent of America's founding fathers. These were the Afghan Mujahideen. They were at that time, guns in hand, battling the evil empire. And they were the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. In 1998, September, another American president ordered missile strikes from the American Navy based in the Indian Ocean, ordered missile strikes to kill Osama bin Laden and his men in the camps in Afghanistan. I do not wish to embarrass you with a reminder that Mr. bin Laden, whom the 15 American missiles were fired to hit in Afghanistan, was only a few years ago the moral equivalent of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. He got angry over the fact that he has been demoted from moral equivalent of your founding fathers, so he is taking out his anger in different ways. I'll come back to that subject more seriously in a minute. You see, why I've recalled all this story is to merely point out to you that the matter of terrorism is rather complicated, and terrorists change faster than the greenback does, much faster. In the game of high politics, in which the stake is an empire and the counters are people. So the terrorist of yesterday is the hero of today, and the hero of yesterday becomes the terrorist of today. This is a serious matter of constantly changing world of images in which we have to keep our heads straight to know what is terrorism and what is not, but more importantly to know what causes it and how to stop it. Next point about our terrorism is that posture of consistency necessarily evades, posture of inconsistency necessarily evades definition. If you are not going to be consistent, you're not going to define. It's a simple principle all students must learn, do learn, or if they don't, ought to learn when they write a paper. If you are serious about it, define yourself, define your topic, define your subject, then proceed to explicate it. If you're not defining, you are evading. You're trying to run away. You're trying to cheat me. You're trying to get a good grade without having done your work. And that's the truth. Every teacher knows that to be the truth. Now, have you noticed in preparation for this evening, I have examined at least 20 official documents on terrorism. Not one defines the word. Not one defines the word. All of them explain it, express it emotively, polemically, to arouse our emotions rather than exercise our intelligence. I'll give you only one example which is representative. October 25th, 1984. George Shultz, then Secretary of State of the United States of America, speaking at the New York Park Avenue Synagogue, a long speech on terrorism. Seven in the State Department bulletin, 7 single-spaced pages, not a single definition of terrorism. What we get is the following quotations. Terrorism is a modern barbarism that we call terrorism. Definition number 1. Definition number 2 is even more brilliant. Terrorism is a form of political violence. Aren't you surprised? It is a form of political violence, says George Shultz, Secretary of State of the United States of America. Number 3, terrorism is a threat to Western civilization. Number 4, terrorism is a menace to Western moral values. Did you notice? Does it tell you anything other than arouse your emotion? Typically, this is typical. Officials and academic functionaries, that is, those who work for officials, you know whom I am speaking of, people like Henry Kissinger. They have always worked for officials. They're academics. I have to tell you a story. Henry Kissinger was always consulting, seldom took his classes at Harvard. He had research assistants. Harvard has research assistants. Harvard is full of graduate students who are research assistants, right? So Kissinger records his speeches on a tape recorder. All his voice is available on the tape recorder. Then his assistants play his lectures to the classes and then take questions and answer questions and lead answers, etc., etc. One day Christian said he missed his plane or whatever happened. He arrived, Kissinger. He approaches the classroom, arrives there. He hears his voice, he's happy. The tape is playing. He gets into the class, there is dead silence, he's happy. Nobody's talking, he's happy. He gets inside the class, looks around. The tape is playing, and 35 tapes are listening. Isn't that a great story? It's a pure Harvard story, I must say. I love Harvard. Anyway, what I'm saying is that they don't define terrorism because definitions involve a commitment to analysis, comprehension, and adherence to some norms of consistency. That's the second characteristic of the official literature on terrorism. The third characteristic is that the absence of definition does not prevent officials to be globalistic. We may not define terrorism, but it is a menace to the moral values of Western civilization. It is a menace also to mankind. It's a menace to good order. Therefore, we must stamp it out worldwide. Our reach has to be global. You need a global reach to kill it. Anti-terrorist policies, therefore, have to be global. There is no question, quotations, same speech of George Shultz. There is no question about our ability to use force where and when it is needed to counter terrorism. There is no geographical limit. On a single day, the missiles hit Afghanistan and Sudan. Those two countries are 2,300 miles apart. And they were hit by navies belonging to a country roughly 8,000 miles away. The reach is global. tough. In September 1998, I told you, they hit several thousand miles apart. A fourth characteristic. The claims of power are not only globalist, they are also omniscient. We know where they are, therefore we know where to hit. We have the means to know, we have the instruments of knowledge, we are omniscients. Quotation, Mr. George Shultz again, and then compare it with today's behavior. We know the difference between terrorists and freedom fighters, says Mr. George Shultz. We know the difference between terrorists and freedom fighters, and as we look around, we have no trouble telling one from the other. Quotes closed. So you see, only Osama bin Laden doesn't know that he is an ally one day, an enemy another. And that's very confusing for Osama bin Laden. I'll come back to his story towards the end, because it's a real story. 5. The officialist approach eschews causation. You don't look at causes of anybody becoming terrorist. Cause? What cause? Cause. They ask us to be looking, to be sympathetic to these people. Another example. The New York Times, December 18, 1985, reported that the foreign minister of Yugoslavia, you remember the days when there was a Yugoslavia? The foreign minister of Yugoslavia requested the Secretary of State of the United States to consider the causes of Palestinian terrorism. The Secretary of State, George Shultz, I'm quoting from the New York Times, went a bit red in the face. He pounded the table and told the visiting foreign minister, there is no connection with any cause. Period. Quotes closed. Why look for causes? Number 6. The moral revulsion that we must feel from against terrorism is selective. We are to feel the terror of those groups which are officially disapproved. We are to applaud the terror of those groups of whom officials do approve. Hence, President Reagan again, I am a contra. He actually said that, I am a contra. You know, the contras of Nicaragua were anything by any definition but terrorists. The media, to move away from the officials, aids the dominant view of terrorism. In 1984, the Palestine Liberation Organization hijacked a tourist boat cruise in the Mediterranean waters. And as it held the passengers hostage, it found a Jewish passenger, Mr. Klinghoffer, a crippled old man, and those cruel Palestinian terrorists shot him and threw him off the board. Now, this is an atrocious, outrageous, condemnable, curseable offense, without doubt. It should have been condemned, and it was condemned. Editorials were written, comments were made, official statements were issued by governments after governments condemning this act, as it should have been. Then, 2 weeks later, Israeli terrorists killed a Palestinian American, or an Arab American, I'm not sure he was a Palestinian, named Alexander Ode, in his office in Los Angeles. The news was reported. The murder was reported. I measured the report in the New York Times, 2 inches. I also measured the report of Mr. Klinghoffer's killing, 140 inches. And Alexander Ode got almost no television reporting, except from LA itself. Then one day at Tufts University, I am speaking. From the other side is Jack Rosenthal, an editor of the New York Times. Don't confuse him with this Abe Rosenthal, who writes the columns and used to be, at that time, the managing editor of the New York, executive editor of the New York Times. So I asked Jack Rosenthal, I said, how can you describe one horror with 140 inches of reporting in one day, and another horror of 2 inches of reporting? I want to tell you his answer. I'm quoting directly. As I confronted Jack Rosenthal, his response, quote, "It was a mistake. We recognize it. Let's move on." Since he was a powerful man, I had to move on. No choice. The dominant approach also excludes from consideration, more importantly to me, the terror of friendly governments. To that question I will return, because it excused, among others, the terrors of Pinochet, who killed one of my closest friends, Orlando Letelier. And it excused the terror of Zia-ul Haq, who killed many of my friends in Pakistan. All I wanted to tell you is, according to my ignorant or vague calculations, the ratio of people killed by state terror of Zia-ul Haq, Pinochet, Argentinian, Brazilian, Indonesian type, versus the killing of the PLO and other terrorist type is literally, conservatively, 1 to 100,000. That's the ratio. So next, my 6th point or 8th point. History unfortunately, recognizes and accords visibility to power and not to weakness. Therefore, visibility has been accorded historically to dominant groups. In our time, by our time I mean the time which began with this day, Columbus Day. The time that begins with Columbus Day is a time of extraordinary, unrecorded holocausts. Great civilizations have been wiped out. The Mayas, the Incas, the Aztecs, the American Indians, the Canadian Indians were all wiped out. And their voices have not been heard even to this day, fully. Now they are beginning to be heard, but not fully. They are heard, yes, but only when the dominant power suffers. Only when resistance has a semblance of costing, of exacting a price, when a Custer is killed or when a Gordon is besieged. That's when you know that there were Indians fighting, Arabs fighting and dying. My last point of this section. US policy in the Cold War period has sponsored terrorist regimes one after another. Samosas, Batistas, all kinds of tyrants have been America's friends, and you know that. And there was a reason for that. I and you are not guilty. We can't consider ourselves guilty because partly we have never been even informed. We can say we did not know and say it honestly. Sometimes we did and protested. I will only take the period of the Cold War, that is the one after World War II, without going into detail, identify to you three periods of American policy of varying degrees of support for terrorist states and terrorist groups. Those periods are 1945 to 56. During this period, the United States intervened on the side of tyrants. In 1953, a constitutional government in Iran was overthrown. Muhammad Mossadegh, and a tyrant, the Shah of Iran, was brought back in. A constitutionally elected government of Arbenz was overthrown. And a tyranny in Argentina was, did I say Argentina? Guatemala was brought in. Between Arbenz's fall and today, American estimates, now official estimates, are that 1/3 of the population of Guatemala has been killed by these tyrants whom CIA supported. That's the first period, 56, ends. 1956 to 1975 is a period of intervention. America, by military or paramilitary means, not just mere support for tyrants, by military or paramilitary means directly goes in support of tyrants. The biggest one that you remember is Indochina, Vietnam, in support of totally unpopular regimes. And it ends, that period I would call a period of counterinsurgency. First period, 45 to 56 interventions. Second period, 1956 to 1975, counterinsurgency. Ends with Vietnam. Period 3, 1958 to 1990. Low intensity warfare. Nicaragua, Contra, Afghanistan, Mujahideen, El Salvador, etc., etc. And now, 1990 to 98 is a period that I only describe honestly as a period of confusion. After this Cold War, nobody knows what to do, how to be, how to justify, where to go, in which way to deal with the world. That is why you have so many theories coming in and going out, coming in. The theories of international relations are entering the American door like foxes. Like foxes in a farmhouse. It's crazy. There was the first 6 months of end of history. What was his name? Francis Fukuyama says the history has ended. America has won. American victory spells the end of history. We don't have to do anything. Everybody was very happy. But then they discovered that there are problems. So there comes, who knows, Professor Samuel Huntington with Clash of Civilizations, straight out of Harvard. Clash of civilization. What is civilization? Clash of cultures, he says. Clash of civilizations, he says. 9 civilizations, he says. 6 civilizations he names. Total confusion. But people think he has done something big. He lasts for almost 4 years, then he dies. He doesn't die, his theory dies. Confusion, confusion, confusion. Now President Clinton comes around and says, Clash of Civilization is bunk. We can do differently. Now, the second size. You've suffered enough, so suffer more. Ain't much good on the other side either. You shouldn't imagine that I have come to praise the other side. But keep the balance in mind. Keep the imbalance in mind and first ask ourselves, what is terrorism? Our first job should be to define the damn thing, name it, give it a description, some kind, other than moral equivalent of founding fathers or a moral outrage to Western civilization. I will stay with you with Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. Terror, says Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. You can all check back to it. Terror is an intense, overpowering fear. That's terror. And he uses terrorizing, terrorism, quote, the use of terrorizing methods, hear me closely, the use of terrorizing methods of governing or resisting a government. Quotes closed. This simple definition has one great virtue, and the virtue of fairness. It's fair. It focuses on the use of coercive violence. Violence that is used illegally, extra-constitutionally to coerce. That bloody red light in your city is also coercive. This is an extraordinary country. This whole West is terribly funny to me. I am driving, the first time I arrived here, I was driving on an empty road in Princeton, New Jersey, where I was going to school. In the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, I was a bit drunk, a young man. I arrived at a red light, and there were 2 cars standing there, and I looked at them in wonder. Why are they standing here? And then the light turned green and they moved. I moved too. You see, in the middle of nowhere, the government's coercive laws, coercive capability was present, and people obeyed. That's not terrorism. That's not coercion. I'm serious, that's consensus. To me, coercion, terror begins where consensus ends. Terror begins where democracy ends. Terror begins where agreement ends. You follow me? Therefore, I am talking about extra-constitutional, extra-legal, illegal coercion by government or by private organizations. That is terror. No question about it. And this definition is correct because it treats terror for what it is, terror whether government commits it or private people commit it. You see, notice something, motivation is kept out of it. We're not talking about whether the cause is just or unjust. We're talking about consensus, consent, absence of consent, legality, absence of legality, constitutionality, absence of constitutionality. Those are the issues. Why do we keep motive out? Because motives differ. Motives differ and make no difference. I have identified in my work 5 types of terrorism. First, state terrorism. Second, religious terrorism. Terrorism inspired by religion. Catholics killing Protestants, Sunnis killing Shias, Shias killing Sunnis, everybody killing everybody in the name of God, religion. Sacred terror, you can call it if you wish. So there is a state, there is church, there is crime, mafia, all kinds of crime commits terror. There is pathology. Unabomber was pathological. You're sick. You want attention of the whole world. You got to kill a president. You kill. You terrorize. You got to hold a bus. You do it. And so there is pathology. And fifth, there is political terror of the private group. Be the Indian, the Vietnamese, the Algerian, the Palestinian, the Baader Meinhof, the Red Brigade, whichever that is. Political terror of the private group. the oppositional terror, I call it. Keep these five in mind and begin to move on. Keep in mind one more thing. Sometimes these five, any two or any three can converge on each other. You start with protest terror. You go crazy, you become pathological, you continue. Goes on. The weathermen started with political terror. They simply got crazy. I'm getting to be my 55 minutes, so I've got to finish fast. Got 10 minutes to go. Oh, how am I going to do it? You see, they converge. State terror can take the form of private terror. For example, you're all familiar with it. The death squad in Latin America, or the death squad in Pakistan. And the government has employed private people to kill its opponents. So it's not quite official, it's privatized. You see what I'm saying? Convergence. Or the political terrorist who goes crazy and becomes pathological. Or the criminal who joins politics. All through in Afghanistan, in Central America, the CIA employed in its covert operations drug pushers. Drugs and guns often go together. Smuggling of all things go together. In fact, you can smuggle women, drugs and guns at the same time. And men too, if they are trying to migrate to the United States. Any number of convergences occur. But within that framework, please move on fast because I have little time. We have to move fast. You would notice that of the 5 types of terror, focus is on only one, the least important. The least important in terms of cost to human lives and human property. The highest cost, state terror. Second high cost, religious terror. Although in the 20th century, religious terror has relatively speaking declined. But if you are looking historically, massive costs. Next high cost, crime. Next high, pathology. A Rand Corporation study, a man called Brian Jenkins, for a 10-year period up to 1988, showed 50% of terror was committed without any political cause at all. No politics. Simply crime and pathology. This is Brian Jenkins' study. So, move on to examine then the focus on only one, the political terrorists, the PLO, the Bin Laden, whoever you want to take, any number. Why do they do it? What makes the terrorist tick? Those I would like to knock them out quickly to you. First, I'm looking for my damn notes which are... Where are they? Did you steal my notes, dude? No, I'll come back to you, don't worry. I'm with you. I'm with you. I just mixed up pages. First, the need to be heard. Now, imagine we are dealing with the minority group, the political private terrorist. First, the need to be heard. Normally, and there are exceptions, there is an effort to be heard, to get your grievances heard by people. They are not hearing it. Then a minority acts, and the majority applauds. The Palestinians, for example, the super terrorists of our time, were dispossessed in 1948. From 1948 to 1968, they went to every court in the world. They knocked at every door in the world. And they were told that they became dispossessed because some radio told them to go away. An Arab radio, which was a lie. Nobody was listening to the truth. Finally, they invented a new form of terror. Literally their invention. The airplane hijacking. And between 1968 and 1975, they pulled the world from its ears. They dragged us out, said, listen, listen. Well, we listen. We still haven't done them justice. But at least we all know and acknowledge. Even the Israelis acknowledge. Remember Golda Meir in 1970, Prime Minister of Israel, saying, there are no Palestinians. They do not exist. Well, damn well they exist now. You are cheating them at Oslo. At least there are some people to cheat now. You can't just push them out. So you see, the need to be heard is essential. One motivation there. Second, mix of anger and helplessness produces an urge to strike out. You are angry. You are feeling helpless. You want retributive. You want to wreak retributive justice. I want to quote somebody from you. You will see what I mean. I have pounded a few walls. I have pounded a few walls myself when I'm alone. Quotes. I want to kick somebody in the rear end. Quotes close. The speaker is Ronald Reagan. After the TWA hijacking, and America unable to solve the problem. Another example. They kept yelling about New Jersey. New Jersey, New Jersey, New Jersey. They kept saying New Jersey. I was afraid to tell them that I was from New Jersey. The speaker is Judy Brown from a small town called Del Mar, New Jersey. She was one of the hostages taken by the Lebanese Shiites who hijacked the TWA plane in 1983. I was afraid to tell them where I was from. Why are they so mad at New Jersey? Judy Brown asked the newspapermen. The New York Times correspondent says that he informed Judy that they were not yelling about the state. they were yelling about the battleship New Jersey, which had pounded the Lebanese Shiite neighborhoods in Beirut for 7 days in a row, killing 1,000 people. And those kids were angry as hell. 3. Experience of violence by a stronger party has historically turned victims into terrorists. Battered children are known to become abusive parents and violent adults. You know that. That's what happens to peoples and nations. When they are battered, they get bad. State terror very often breeds collective terror. Do you recall the fact that the Jews were never terrorists? By and large, Jews were not known to commit terror, except during and after the Holocaust. Most studies show that majority of members of the worst terrorist groups in Israel or in Palestine, the Stern and the Irgun gangs, were people who were immigrants from the most anti-Semitic countries of Eastern Europe and Germany. Similarly, the young Shiites of Lebanon or the Palestinians from the refugee camps, these are battered people. Pounding the walls is a metaphor for internecine warfare, for internal violence. They become very violent. The ghettos are violent internally. They become violent externally when there is a clear, identifiable external target, an enemy they can say, yes, this one did it to me. Then they can strike back. 5. Example is a bad thing because example spreads. There was a highly publicized Beirut hijacking of the TWA plane. After that hijacking, there was hijacking attempts at 9 different American airports. American airports. Pathological groups or individuals modeling on the others. Even more serious are examples set by governments. When governments engage in terror, they set very large examples. And when they engage in supporting terror, they engage in other sets of examples. 6. Absence of revolutionary ideology is central to victim terrorism. Revolutionaries do not commit unthinking terror. Those of you who are familiar with revolutionary theory know the debates, the disputes, the quarrels, the fights within revolutionary groups of Europe. The fight between anarchists and Marxists, for example. But the Marxists have always argued that revolutionary terror, if ever engaged in, must be sociologically and psychologically selective. Don't hijack a plane. Don't hold hostages. Don't kill children, for God's sake. Have you recalled also that the great revolutions, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Algerian, the Cuban, never engaged in hijacking type of terrorism. They did engage in terrorism, but it was highly selective, it was highly sociological, it was still deplorable, but there was an organized, highly limited, selective character to it. So absence of revolutionary ideology that begins more or less all of the post-World War II period has been central to this phenomenon. My final question with you is, but these conditions have existed for a long time, for a very, very long time. But why then this flurry of private political terrorism? Why now so much of it and so visible? And the answer is modern technology. It is a most and globalization. Look, modern terrorism, contemporary terrorism, frankly, is a class act. It's a class act. It's not a revolutionary act alone. It's a class act. You have got to have an international passport to do it. You better be speaking more than one language. It is in fact better if you are brown but have a blonde on your arms. So much the better, easier to pass the customs. The checkposts, it's a class act. But it's modern travel, modern passport, modern guns, and most importantly, modern communication. You have a cause, you can communicate it through radio and television. They will all come swarming if you have taken an aircraft and you are holding 150 Americans hostages, and they will all hear your cause. You have a modern weapon through which you can shoot a mile away, they can't reach you. And you have the modern means of communicating. When they put together the cause, the instrument of coercion, and the instrument of communication, politics is made. A new kind of politics becomes possible. To this challenge, rulers from one country after another have been responding with traditional methods. The traditional method of shooting it out, whether it's missiles or some other means, shooting it out. And the Israelis are very proud of it, the Americans are very proud of it, the French became very proud of it, now the Pakistanis are proud of it. The Pakistanis say our commandos are the best. Frankly, it won't work. The point proves a central problem of our time. Political minds rooted in the past and modern times producing new realities. Therefore, in conclusion, what is my recommendation to America? Quickly, without explaining them, you would know what I mean, what to do. First, avoid extremes of double standards. If you are going to practice double standards, you will be paid with double standards. Don't use it. Don't condone Israeli terror, Pakistani terror, Nicaraguan terror, El Salvador terror on the one hand, and then complain about Afghan terror, Pakistani terror, or Palestinian terror. Doesn't work. Try to be even-handed. A superpower cannot promote terror in one place and reasonably expect to discourage terrorism in another place. Won't work in this shrunken world. Second, 1A, or second, do not condone the terror of your allies. Condemn them, fight them, punish them evenly. Third, please eschew, avoid covert operations and low-intensity warfare. Covert operations and low-intensity warfare are breeding ground of terror and drugs. Violence and drugs are bred there. The structure of covert operation, and I made a film about it which has been very popular in Europe, called Dealing with the Demon. What I have shown is, wherever covert operation has been, there has been the central drug problem. That has been also the center of drug trade, because the structure of covert operation, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Nicaragua, Central Asia, Central America, the structure of drug operation, covert operation, is very hospitable to drug trade. Avoid it, give it up, doesn't help. Fourthly, please focus on causes and help ameliorate causes. Even when you help or are perceived to help this little, it disappears. Palestinian terror has gone down. Not because the injustice is gone, but because perception developed that maybe something is happening with the peace process. This is a wrong perception. Terror will come back. But there is that perception. Try to look at causes and solve problems. 4, 5. Do not concentrate on military solutions. Do not seek military solution. Terrorism is a political problem. Seek political solutions. I can give you examples. Look, the only time the United States responded diplomatically and not militarily to a terrorist activity, i.e. hostage taking, was Iran. They tried a little thing when Taba failed, stopped. Mostly engaged in diplomacy for 7 months. You know what they got? They got all the hostages back safe. And they got $6 billion in addition from the Iranians. It works. Diplomacy works. Military doesn't work. Take the example of the last attack on bin Laden. Number one, you don't know what you're attacking. They say they know, they don't know. They attacked, they were trying to kill Gaddafi, right? They killed his 4-year-old daughter. That poor baby hadn't done anything. Gaddafi is still alive, mashallah. They tried to kill Saddam Hussein. They killed Layla bin Attar, an innocent woman. They tried to kill bin Laden and his men. Not one died, 25 other people died. They tried to destroy a chemical factory in Sudan. Now they are admitting they destroyed a medicine factory. 1/2 of the production of medicine in Sudan has been destroyed, not a chemical factory. You don't know. You think you know. You're going to hit the wrong thing all the time. You know, I'm the only one who ought to be happy about it. The bin Laden thing. But I'm not very happy because I'm in opposition. 2 of your missiles fell in Iran, in Pakistan. 4 fell in Pakistan. 1 was slightly damaged, 2 were totally damaged, 1 was slightly damaged, and was totally intact. For 10 years, the American government has kept an embargo on Pakistan because Pakistan is trying stupidly to build nuclear weapons and missiles. So we have a technology embargo on my country. One of the missiles was intact. And what do you think? The Pakistani official told the Washington Post, he said, it is the gift from Allah. They won't give us technology, and now we have got the technology, and our scientists are examining this missile very carefully. You see? Fell into the wrong hands by American policy. So don't do that. Look for political solutions. Do not look for military solutions. They cause more problems than they solve. And 6, please help reinforce and strengthen the framework of international law. There was a criminal court in Rome. Why didn't they go to it first, get a warrant against bin Laden if they have some evidence? Get a warrant, then go after him internationally. Enforce the United Nations, reinforce the International Court of Justice. This unilateralism just makes us look very stupid, and them relatively smaller. I think I've taken too much of your time. I am exactly 17 minutes ahead of the time given to me, and nobody said boo. So many thanks for bearing with me. I will take questions if you have time. As hard, harsh, tough as you wish. Yeah.
You mentioned you were wanting to go into a little bit more about bin Laden. You mentioned some of your talk. If you can give some more background on this case of a former ally in Washington.
As the meeting clears a little bit, the question here is that I mentioned that I will go somewhat into the story of bin Laden in the Saudi in Afghanistan, and didn't quite do so. Could I go into some details? The point about bin Laden would be roughly the same as the point between Sheikh Abdul Rahman, who was accused and convicted of encouraging the blowing up of the International Trade Center in New York City. The New Yorker had a long story on him, and it's the same as that of Amal Kansi, the Pakistani Baluch who was also convicted of murder of 3 CIA agents. Are you familiar with those cases? And look, let me see if I can be short on this, very short. Jihad, which has been translated to you 1,000 times as holy war, is not quite just that. Jihad is a word that means to struggle. And it could be a struggle by violence or a struggle by non-violent means. There are 2 forms, Jihad al-Saghir, The small jihad and the big jihad. The small jihad involves violence, the big jihad involves the struggles with self. Those are the concepts of jihad. The reason I'm mentioning this is that in Islamic history, jihad as an international violent phenomenon had disappeared in the last 400 years, for all practical purposes. It was revived suddenly with American help in the 1980s. When the Soviet Union intervened in Afghanistan and the military dictator of Pakistan which borders on Afghanistan, saw an opportunity in it and launched a jihad there against godless communism. The United States saw an extraordinary opportunity. Communism hadn't yet died then. This is 1981. The United States saw a God-sent opportunity to mobilize 1 billion Muslims against what Reagan called the evil empire. And money started pouring in. CIA agents started going all over the Muslim world, recruiting people to fight in the great jihad. Bin Laden was one of the early prize recruits because he was not only an Arab, he was also a Saudi. He was not only a Saudi, he was also a multimillionaire, willing to put his own money into the matter. And Bin Laden went around recruiting people for the jihad against communism. I first met him in 1986, and he was recommended to me by an American official whom I do not know whether he was an agent or not an agent. I have no idea of that. I wouldn't accuse this poor American as a CIA agent. I was talking to him and I said, who are the Arabs here who will be interesting? By here I meant in Afghanistan, Pakistan. He said, you must mean Osama. And I went to see Osama, and there was Osama, rich, bringing in recruits from Algeria, from Sudan, from Egypt, just like Sheikh Abdul Rahman. And this fellow was an ally. Then he remained an ally. He turns at a particular moment. In 1990, the United States goes into Saudi Arabia with forces. Saudi Arabia is the holy place of Muslims, Makkah, Medina. There had never been foreign troops there. Now in 1990, during the Gulf War, they went in the name of helping Saudi to defeat Saddam Hussein. Osama bin Laden remained quiet. Then Saddam was defeated. Saddam is defeated, but American troops stayed on. In the Kaaba, the land of the Kaaba, foreign troops. He wrote letters after letters saying, why are you here? Get out! You came to help, but you have stayed on. And finally, he started his jihad with against the other occupiers. His mission is to get American troops out of Saudi Arabia. His earlier mission was to get American troops out of Afghanistan, Russian troops out of Afghanistan. See what I was saying earlier about covert operations. A second point to be made about him, which is the same about Aymal Khansi. If you have forgotten Aymal Khansi, tell me and I'll remind you of him. Look, these are tribal people. These are people who are really tribal. Being a millionaire doesn't matter. Their code of ethics is tribal. They are not me. tribal code of ethics consists of two words: loyalty and revenge. You are my friend, you keep your word, I am loyal to you. You break your word, I go on my revenge path. For him, as for Ambakisye, America has broken his word. The loyal friend has betrayed. To the one that you swore blood loyalty has betrayed. They're going to go for you. There are going to be a lot more. There are going to be a lot more. These are the chickens of the Afghanistan war coming home to roost. And this is why I said towards the conclusion, covert operations, stop them. There is a price attached to those that the American people cannot calculate. And Kissinger type of people do not know. They don't know. They don't have the history to know. Have I explained myself? Any other question?
We have microphones at the front of this aisle and the other aisle. If people have any questions, Dr. Ahmad, I have a question myself. Yes, politics is simply violence pursued by other means. And why should we expect any representation of terrorism to be anything other than propaganda? And secondly, what do we do with a situation like Kosovo, where violence seems to be the only language that a violent dictator himself understands?
The first question is easier to answer. The second is much harder. If we accept the definition of politics as the pursuit of interests by violent means, then there is no debate. Those who dislike terrorists, who are against them, will denounce them. Those who like terrorists, who are for them, would welcome them. And the world will go on in its Manichaean ways. I am arguing throughout this evening that politics is not the pursuit of interests by violence. I am arguing that politics, in the best sense of the word, ought to be the pursuit of interests by peaceful means. I have further argued that peaceful means work much better than the pursuit of interests by violent means. Now, if I'm wrong about that argument, I would love to debate that, but that's my argument. The Kosovo question is very interesting and harder to deal with. My preference has been, and I think one person here who knows this is David Barsamian. By 1991, when genocide had begun in Bosnia, everybody knew that after Bosnia it will be Kosovo. In Bosnia, in 1990, 4 nations presented a proposal to the Security Council of the United Nations, saying here, violence is likely to begin and get very, very bad. And we request that a small Security Council, United Nations presence in Bosnia now might prevent the breakup of a massive Holocaust later. 2 countries vetoed that proposal at the United Nations Security Council, and it never passed. And nobody attended to the Bosnian genocide until it was far too late. I don't understand, frankly, why Mr. What's his name, has to be sent now to Kosovo, Holbrook. Why now? Since 1991, not just me, hundreds of people who know the Balkans and who know that particular conflict knew that Kosovo will be Milosevic's next target, because it was his first target. That's where he began. It's on the bodies of those people that he made his fascist career. Now, at this late date, if they ask me, I have an answer. He is an organized state terrorist, like Adolf Hitler. He is not amenable to negotiations. He has never been amenable to negotiations. He has to be pushed, in this case militarily. And not because I prefer military solutions, but because political solutions have been avoided for 9 long years. What does it over? Every day they say NATO will act, NATO will act, and they are dealing with this man. Look, there is one area in which I could not agree with Mahatma Gandhi, who was in some ways sort of teacher of mine. And that is, Hitler could not have been stopped after he had reached a certain point. Gandhi was arguing, let him run, let him take over everything. What the hell? We'll deal with him later. But Gandhi was a saint. I don't know if I have answered your question. Any other?
I have
Yes.
a question. It seems like there's been kind of a selective war crimes tribunal involving Syria. But some weeks ago, and this was kind of buried in the news, and probably there's some people that don't know about this, there was a vote in Italy by the UN delegates to set up a permanent war crimes tribunal based on the Nuremberg principles, and it was voted 120 to 7. There was a certain superpower that led the opposition to this, and I was wondering if you could comment to just what went on, because I don't think a lot of
I
people
didn't follow that particular vote. I know what you're saying. It's the International Crimes Tribunal in Rome. I didn't follow the vote clearly, and because I have been traveling these last 4 months, so I have missed that one in the details of it. Therefore, my knowledge is so faulty, I cannot give you a clean analysis. I know that. But what were the politics of it? I would like to get deeper into it. So ignorance, I plead ignorance in this case. Anybody else? Yes. You seem to be restless. 3 people here seem to be restless. Yes? No? Yes? Yes? Yes?
I have a question. I raised my hand at the beginning, and I'm a short, blonde female, and that's a men's question.
Please.
Okay?
Go at it.
Yes, I want to know what your opinion is of bureaucratic terrorism that we have in this country. State terrorism. Initially, the Social Security card and the driver's license were to help us, but now they've become national identity cards. 1984, Big Brother's watching you, and it's watching us pretty damn quickly. You can get a credit report in seconds and other things like that. And it's very intimidating to us because it affects our ability to get a job, to support ourselves. If you're on the streets, and I am between fixed residences right now, I'm not homeless. Homeless is a box, it's a pejorative box that keeps people homeless. And I'm very upset about the situation. I choose to stay in Boulder for God knows what reason. Now I was cursed, I guess. You're not familiar with that. But anyway, I'm very upset. I've seen the erosion of rights, civil rights in this country in 30 years. I had a civics teacher in the 1960s who was 50, 60-ish. She said, I see the erosion of rights since the beginning of the century. You need to be wary, you need to watch out. And 1984 is already here. What do you have as a solution to that problem? The challenge that I see.
I would say two things, Miss. One, you may disagree with me, and the other, I'm sure you won't. First, the solution. The solution is always a struggle of people. You are absolutely right that, I find it extraordinary. President Clinton is a democratically elected president from his party, Democratic Party. And he actually has engaged, and he's popular with black people and with poor people. And yet he has effectively abolished the New Deal. And that's erosion of rights. We have to protest, we have to struggle. The answer to erosion of rights, which you're correct in identifying, of injustice, increasing injustice, is a struggle. It's through people's struggle that society is changed. Bureaucrats, politicians don't change societies unless they are pushed to do it. And people's struggle pushes them. That's the first one. So your call is a call for organizing, struggling, pushing for rights.
But it wears you out. The bureaucratic system wears you out.
Well, not the count. People have lots of power. People are people. They will win. They do. I know it has worn you out. It has worn me out too. But we are not the only people. There's a lot of us. There's this whole crowd. So have faith. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You were talking about when you went through the listing of how to solve terrorism. On that report, you talked about helping ameliorate the causes, and you've said that since the peace process has begun, that Palestinian terror has gone down. More Israelis have been killed since the peace process was signed, 5 years since it was signed, than in 50 years before it.
That's correct.
Then how do you reconcile this?
It's very simple.
Okay.
More Palestinians have lost more land since the peace process began than in the previous 15 years. And they have lost more water control in the previous 4 years than in the previous 22 years. And they have, in other words, the Palestinians are constantly. Look, I'm sorry to put it this way. It's not pleasant. And I'm sure Palestinians will feel hurt by saying that they are like American Indians today. They are being pushed. It's sickening to see them pushed in the name of peace. And therefore, there is terror. That's the explanation. If you destroy their livelihood, if you want to take away their home, look, since the running of the Oslo process, 67 houses by my count, and God knows how many more because I stopped counting that year, were demolished by the Israelis in order to expand settlements. These are Jewish settlements by people who come from Brooklyn and the Bronx.
What is going to happen now that Israelis are saying that Palestine will never have a statehood? What is going to happen now with this grotesque Sharon? Back in.
I'll tell you what will happen.
Quite frankly, there are only two scenarios left. At the moment, if the current trend continues, the answer to his question is this. Israel will either develop into a South Africa of the apartheid period, or it will develop into an America of the 18th century. Chances of Israel becoming the America of the 18th century, namely wiping the Indians out and putting them on reservations, are very low. Because the world has changed. It's not the 18th century. Therefore, the chances of Israel developing into South Africa are very high. And that's where I think it is not in the interest of the Israelis, it's not in the interest of the Jews, and it's not in the interest of the Arabs, for this particular horror of the current Israeli government policy continuing. It's not in their interest, it's a cowardly American government that is making it possible.
You're welcome, sir.
You've heard of the wet the dog syndrome, which Clinton was supposed to have been accused of in ordering the bombings of Afghanistan and Sudan. Now that the impeachment inquiry has been voted upon, can we expect a much greater kind of influence of the wag the dog in the case of Kosovo? And if it turns out that Mr. Ken Starr reveals that instead of only a female intern that President Clinton had sexual relations with, he was also involved in a male intern, do you think it would have a greater effect?
You are speaking of Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton? I'm a little confused at the moment. Bill or Hillary? Bill.
Bill.
Bill. How should I answer it? I'm not a student of internal American politics. Therefore, it's very hard for me to predict. How is that? Nothing will happen really, either way. Clinton is gonna stay.
I wanted to follow up on
Go.
about the Israeli conflict, peace process that they're doing right now. How will Ariel Sharon's appointment affect this whole thing?
Everybody's predicting it will make things worse.
Do you think that now he's trying to get the conservatives on his sort of bandwagon?
The liberal American press is saying Netanyahu has put Sharon there because he wants to make a deal with the Palestinians. The Palestinians and the Arabs are saying Sharon being there means there will be no deal. I personally think there wasn't a deal before, there will not be a deal next. I'll tell you what. You are being given false figures. The New York Times reported twice in the last month that now the PLO controls 30% of the West Bank. And after this deal, the PLO will control 50% of the West Bank. This is incorrect information. Currently, the PLO controls in the municipal sense of the word, not in the political sense of it. In the same way as the mayor of Boulder controls mayor, PLO controls 3% of the West Bank. After this deal, they will control 5% of the West Bank. The rest of the West Bank will remain in Israeli control, and all of the West Bank will remain under Israeli sovereignty. And the Palestinians will remain an occupied people, at best with municipal rights. I personally think they should either be given independence or they should be annexed and become part of Israel. But Israel will not allow the Palestinians to become part of Israel because it is already, forgive me for saying that, it is already an apartheid state. It's already a state not of Israeli people, it's a state of the Jewish people. No self-respecting American Jew would like to live in America if America was designed like Israel. In other words, if American Jews were treated as second-class and third-class citizens. How do they expect the Palestinians to live in it?
We're going to take 2 more questions and then we're going to wrap it up. So.
Yeah.
The title of your talk suggested an even-handed regard for the scourge of terrorism, equal indictments, I was hoping, of terrorism in all its forms. Instead, I heard your rebuke of state terrorism, certainly state terror that's been supported by Western states. But besides your sympathetic remarks for Leon Klinghoffer, I picked up many insinuations that terrorism by private organizations leads to the promotion, at least the enhanced visibility, of causes that you support, including, for instance, the rights of the Palestinian people, which you frequently refer to in your talk. My question is whether the means of promoting these causes, namely terrorism, can actually justify the ends.
No, it can't. Holy Lord, I have been misunderstood.
I don't know if it's justified by me.
Since 1968, when the PLO emerged as a major force in Palestinian politics, I have argued in writing and verbally in speeches 2 things. One, that the Palestinian cause is just and must be heard, that the Palestinians must be given justice. And 2, I have argued that the form of political struggle they have chosen is wrong and destined to fail. And my friend Edward Said has written repeatedly, reminding audiences, his reading audiences, of the fact that this has been my argument. Their particular form of terrorism, their particular form of violence, I considered politically, morally, historically incorrect, wrong from the beginning. And I considered their cause just. For a just cause, they employed stupid means. Sorry. I hope it has answered your question. No, there has never been any doubt in my mind about that. And look, I'm sorry, look where it brought them. It brought them where I am answering the question of this young man with emotion. Oslo is a fraudulent peace accord. Yasser Arafat has effectively become a collaborator. Effectively a collaborator. And many people will not like me to hear me say those words, but that's the truth. That's where this form of terrorism can bring you. Because it wasn't political. It wasn't thought out. It had no psychological and sociological moorings. Sorry. Last one.
Okay, on a slightly different note, I was wondering if you could reflect on your experience, perhaps even identity in Pakistan and the war of protection. thanks to some of the things that you point to about the support of right-wing forces in the Third World War, the social discourse in most of that network has become extremely right-wing and polarizing people. And therefore, the challenge becomes for people within the network that how to change the level of that, how to bring up these sorts of discussions. You can have this kind of presentation here, but you can't have it in the back. Well, actually, you still can, but it seems like a matter of time before it would not be possible. So what can you do?
It's me. Many different ways. You got the question, all of you. This is the last one, and I'm not going to go on, because I know you have been very patient with me. Look, in many different ways, we all should, first of all, I think I should say, I would sound very presumptuous if I talked in personal terms, because that's neither here nor there. Every individual's situation is different. But I think for now I am talking to people who are working with their minds. They're intellectuals. I don't care whether you are from Pakistan or Palestine or America or Latin America. I think our first responsibility is to deploy our intellect critically and take risks within the environment in which we live or the environment with which we interact. We have to take risks, intellectual risks, personal risks. It is very difficult for intellectuals to combine the good life with good work. Those two things don't go together all the time. Sometimes they do. If you are very lucky, they do. But most of the time, you have to be prepared that they don't. My very close Israeli friend, Israel Shahak, is a Jewish Israeli intellectual living in Jerusalem and for years teaching there. His was a comfortable, simple, wonderful, rich life of research, of speaking, of reading. He's a kind of, comes closest to being the Talmudic scholar that I've ever known. 69, was head of the Human Rights Commission of Israel and took an honest position on the torture of Palestinians in Israeli prisons. He was a spatterpound. It was difficult for him to shop in the supermarket. He started getting his students to shop for him. But those are risks he had to take. It's a hazard we encounter. You, in your own settings, whatever your settings are, think critically, work hard, be honest, and be critical, and take risks, number one. Two, if you are a third world intellectual, then do two things. If you are a third world intellectual living here, do two things. One, engage yourself with American problems, with American struggles. Can I tell you a story? In 1958, I'm leaving Pakistan. I come from a part of the old subcontinent, which is now India. And my mother refused to leave for Pakistan. My brothers came to Pakistan and brought me there. I was too small to know what the hell was happening to me. So in 58, I'm grown up. I write to my mother in India, who never left for Pakistan, "Okay, Mama, I'm going to
the West, to America, and give me your blessings. So she wrote back to me. And she wrote two things, and I want to share this with you. You are young people. First, she said that you are going west. I may never see you again. But you must remember that there are two Wests. There is an imperial West, and there is an anti-imperialist West. Work with the one and fight the other. Wherever we live, we must live organically. If we are living in America, whether I'm a Pakistani or whoever I am, I have to be part of an American struggle also. And two, or three I should say, don't forget your people. You should be universal, but you can never be fully universal unless you know your own, unless you have your roots, unless you water it, fertilize it, intervene there. You figure out your way of intervening, but do intervene, please.